before I even talk about the concept of writing on the wall, I want to say how this idea got started. And this whole project got started when Mr. Michal Shulman walked into my office and said, I have an idea. Once Ms. Shulman has an idea, it's already kind of moving already. It's just a question of like, what are we saying yes to? And it's always going to be something that is thoughtful, creative, that brings out the best in our students, because that's the type of teacher that she is. And that's what really is behind the entire project that she put together here. And I want to begin by thanking her for her fabulous inspiration and work. One of the great parts about Michal is that she's not a lone wolf, a single player. She's actually a very good team player. And she knows how to involve other people to really help her out. And she turned our arts department, and specifically to Mr. Jason Novetsky and Ms. Carolina Cohen. Really great minds, and not just minds, actors together, you get what we have tonight. Tonight is a culmination of a year-long course on the Holocaust remembrance, which was taught by Ms. Shulman, but also that developed into a tremendous, beautiful piece of artwork, which is on display in the front of our school, which we're going to have a chance to see and understand the meaning of in just a little bit. The term, the title of the project is The Writing on the Wall. And it's an expression we know, seeing the writing on the wall, from regular usage in the English language today. But I don't know how many of you know that actually this is a biblical reference. This expression of reading the writing on the wall actually comes from the book of Daniel. Not enough people study the book of Daniel. And the book of Daniel teaches us that a foreign king, which had overtaken Israel, was partying and didn't realize that Hashem was putting some writing on the wall, which was saying, your time is almost up. And if you don't read the writing on the wall appropriately, bad things can happen to you. So this is really an important message for us about seeing what's going on in the world around us, being aware of what's happening, and taking real sense of what is and taking action when need be in order to ensure our continuity and our success. And so therefore it's a beautiful title for the project, a beautiful concept for what the students have done this year in the course. And I'm really excited about all the work you've done, and I'm excited about the showcase that we're going to see. So thank you very much. After I thank Ms. Shulman, Mr. Novetsky, and Ms. Cohen, I want to thank all the students in the course. You're all here tonight. Students, please stand up. When you see those students, tell them everything. Because at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, and everywhere in between, this is all about students' growth and learning, and they've done a fabulous job. It's my great honor and pleasure to introduce our Rosh Yeshivah, Rabbi Dr. Raymond Hearn.
Extraordinary night to celebrate an extraordinary project. I want to join our head and really congratulate our extraordinary students and extraordinary faculty members. You get the idea, right? It's an extraordinary night. This last year, aside from the crushing pandemic and also which was health and well-being. Also, many times during this year, where hate and hostility came under the microscope. And it came in many different forms, in many different colors, and in many different venues. But there was a lot of it this year, and our students and all of us had to contend with that in one way or another, many times with an emotional energy that we had to summon from our deepest resources of ourselves. And more important than just condemning the evils of some of the rotten parts of society, which we have to do, what we have to know as students students, as teachers, as parents, is that if we do not, if we sit still and we're not out there protesting and standing up for what's right, and calling out evil for what it is, and taking every possible action that we can, if we don't do that, then we are, in a sense, accomplices of the moral and religious crime that will take place. The quote that you'll see on the mural from Edinburgh reminds me of the long Jewish tradition about the importance of not remaining silent. And it's rooted in the Pasuk which says, Lo tamlo acham ve'echa. You shall not stand idly by while your friend, and here we take friend in the most literal sense, when somebody else's life, is at stake. This is what this project is fundamentally about, and it is the mission of us as Jews, and it's certainly the mission of us at Yeshivah Flatbush.
I now call on one of our students to give his understanding of why I study the Holocaust. Mr. Jack, is that Jack? My name is Jack. I'm going to talk about why I study the Holocaust. Taking this Holocaust really did change.
Jack, get in, Jack.
This class taught me to never take anything for granted in life, and I really need that. I'm imagining if God was your place in the Jewish situation, you would treat it like dogs, rather than any food and sleep in the freezing cold. I can't even imagine it. And I'm going to give you guys a few examples of an hour like now to an hour like that.
Jack, can you pull the mic close to your mouth?
We were freezing cold. I can't imagine it. We were freezing cold. We come outside and we reach each other again. And we're all freezing cold. For the 10 seconds going into our For the Jews then, they were freezing for hours and hours and hours. Number two, we get the comfort of from our parents. For the Jews then, they didn't have anything. They didn't know when the next week the crazy part is. We rely on our parents for food, but the parents relied on us for free. Because the kids would be able to go smuggle food through little holes. And if the kid didn't return in a couple hours, the parents knew that was it. He was gone. I can't imagine any of this. The crazy part is, these people are the same as me. We're both Jewish. There's nothing different between us. So people might say, yeah, I feel terrible for the Holocaust. That's not enough. We have to dig down and think about all the little things that happen. You have to really sit down and think, what if this was me? You were lucky enough that Hashem didn't put you in this situation. To tell you the truth, as much as I don't want to say I would stand up, and as easy it is to say, the honest answer is, I really don't know what I would do. I would be terrified that the same time I was a Jew. And I would say, if I was Jewish, the easy way out might be not do anything, but take a stand and save another Jew, which is really important. To conclude, we must never forget the Holocaust, and let's stand tall and be proud to be a Jew. And we should represent all the Jews that died in the Holocaust because they're watching over us right now today. I know I mentioned this before, but whenever you don't want to think about the Holocaust, you have to think to yourself, what's better than the Holocaust? And not take life for granted. Please always be proud to be Jew. They will never take us all out no matter what, because we're all sitting here today. I'm going to give you a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. In the end, remember not the words that are enemies, but the status of our friend. What this quote means is, you have to at least do something to stand up. You cannot be silent. Thank you.
Jack is set. Robbie, you have to speak more into the mic, guys.
Okay, sorry. Jack, you gotta speak up. Okay, the next speakers are Dorothy Tenenbaum and Rabbi Yaakov Ketterstein, children of Esther, a survivor of Auschwitz. Dorothy is a board member of Facing History, the organization who sponsored this event, and both will share their family story and emphasize the importance of Holocaust education. Dorothy?
evening to all of you. The mural, by the way, is fabulous. I had a chance to see it, and I'm honored to be here tonight. Sorry, I lost it. Okay, I'm honored to be here tonight to speak as a child of Holocaust survivors along with my brother, Yaakov Peterson. I am a long and committed supporter of facing history in ourselves, and I am reminded of some of the lessons that help us to understand how did this happen. Now, many of you who are studying facing history are reminded of some of the extraordinary statements and thoughts that are in the content, such as Germany was considered one of the great, the Holocaust was considered to be one of the greatest crimes to humanity. And yet Germany was a country with the highest standards within Western civilization. How did a civilized, educated society make the leap? What were the undercurrents in society that allowed it? What was the power of the individual, the choices that were made? And how can we begin to see ourselves as civic actors, as problem solvers, as whether we choose to be bystanders or upstanders? Now, when I was looking at this mural and realizing that pacifiers are in front of the victims and they're forced to face themselves and reflect, I thought of my trip to Berlin. And I'm reminded of the interactive Holocaust memorials in Berlin where you see different markers, inscriptions, banners, where homes of Jews lived, where businesses once existed. And there are also banners which show each one of the Nuremberg laws that took away the human rights of all of the Jews that lived in Germany at the time. So you walk through and you'll see a banner that says you can no longer, Jews cannot marry a German, or you'll see Jews cannot own businesses. So wherever you go in Berlin, there's a sense of an interactive understanding of their history. So how did all this happen? This is a question that I, as a child of a survivor, has asked myself since I began to understand that the number 52058 on my mother's arm was not our phone number, as she told me as a little girl, when I questioned why she had this tattoo and no one else did. Nor was the tattoo put there because others assumed she had been a convict in a jail. So it was interesting that when I would walk with her on the street or we would be on the subway, people would whisper and think that she had that tattoo because she was actually an ex-convict. The only crime she was guilty of is that she was a Jew. So these are the kind of things that I observed as a young child. When I was old enough, I began to question, how did it happen? Just like you're doing in your facing history class. However, somehow along the way, I was educated around the atrocities, and they were so horrific, and they were so personal to me, because every one of my family members, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, never saw photos of them. They were all murdered. And so I couldn't go beyond that horrific atrocities that were part of my memory of the family album that I never had. So I was robbed of all of this intergeneral joy of having a family. And it took me many, many years to get beyond that prison in my mind, but eventually I understood that staying there was not a way to inform, to educate, and hopefully prevent these atrocities for the next and future generations. And that's what took me to Facing History. Facing History had content that I turned to. It was where critical thinking was applied. It was where the Holocaust and human behavior began to break down, and the actions of the Nazis and their impact and their ability to persuade an entire nation started to seep into my thinking around this tragedy. The doctors who take a Hippocratic oath and then did these horrific experiments in Auschwitz, how did they make that leap? The Kristallnacht rampage with no protests or arrests. The demonizing of Jews and seeing each indictment of Jews sticking, no matter how senseless, absurd, or frightening these accusations were. The co-opting of the judicial system, which took away any opportunity for Jews to be able to turn to, which you would have in a democratic institution persecution. It further demonized Jews and made them stateless in their own countries. And among their neighbors and professional colleagues, they had no place to turn. The judicial system was not even there for them. The Nazis had put in their own judges. How did this all happen? It is not an overnight phenomenon. People don't get up one day and start a genocide campaign. Incremental efforts in all media platforms, in those days it was newspapers and radios, reinforcing these beliefs among thought leaders, acceptance in government representatives, economic downturns, a judicial system, as I just mentioned, that had been completely politicized and corrupt, the not making challenging statements or actions. This were the parts of the infrastructure of the country that fell to the impact of Nazis. This is what the situation was that allowed hate to perpetuate. Today, I want to say that I work on college campuses. My focus is in an organization called Israel on Campus Coalition. And I work with Jewish students who feel marginalized because they are proud Jews, and if they identify as Zionists, they are marginalized constantly from any social justice work on their campus. They are the only group on the campus that are told that they must choose between their Zionist and Jewish identity and their social justice work, as if we were not allowed to have more than one identity, yet on campuses other students have many. These are very hard times. However, when I remind myself of the many facing history workshops that I took, I am so inspired and grateful to those students who step up on these campuses and know that the consequences for them on the campus may be quite difficult. Critical thinking and history, that is facing history. These are the two values that have been eliminated and reconfigured for the benefit of others. Facts which are documented can be thrown out in classrooms of the professors who are ideologized and prefer not to share different points of views with the students. That's why this is so important for you guys to understand what it means to be a critical thinker and what it means to be an upstander. We are living at a time when over 50% of students in this country have no understanding or idea about the Holocaust. And we have an increase in revisionism and accusations that Jews use the Holocaust to demonize others or to get benefits from it. We are living in a time when indictments are being thrown at our community regularly, and as absurd as some of them may be, they are accepted and perpetuated. When someone makes an accusation and you present data which shows they are misinformed, there are two responses. One could be, I didn't know, thank you so much for giving me this information. Or the other is, I don't care or believe what you're telling me, therefore I will continue to perpetuate my beliefs. One person is misinformed, the other is a hate monger, willing to continue to do these egregious accusations. Anti-Semitism begins as the anti-Semitism began, one, as the killing of Christ in the early years. It then became the inferior race during the time of the Nazi rise. Today we are accused, as we are accused today, because we are part of Jewish peoplehood and the right to a sovereign state. So no matter what your political beliefs are, you must make critical thinking the center of your humanism and defend your people against anti-Semitism, no different than any other ethnic group fights against racism or Asian hate or whatever is out there. We are the only ones that can define what anti-Semitism is, no different than we are not in a position to define racism or Asian hate for others. Facing history gives you the tools so necessary for understanding how to open up a one-sided conversation to more perspectives, how to look at history as an important reference, and how to understand victimization, not as a competition, but as a lesson to avoid such tragedies in your generation. There is much to do. The power of you, the individual, is the voice we need, and I am grateful for all of you committed to this work who have made the choice to be upstanders. Thank you. Privilege for me to introduce my brother.
Actually, just for the sake of time, because our borough president has a few things to do this evening. my great pleasure to introduce someone who at this point I consider a good friend. We've actually spoken together at other occasions. But I want to say why I think it's so important that he's here. It's not only because he's been a great borough president for us, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the fact that, you know, I'd be mayor soon, that would be wonderful. But there's something really Eric spoke in my synagogue a year ago, the week before COVID broke out, and we were actually working together on a project which was going to bring students from all different schools, all different backgrounds, to work together to understand one another, because what we're doing tonight is something that's very deep to Eric's heart. He really cares about community and people being able to live together and to speak to one another and to socialize with one another. It's a cause that's deep in his heart, and even though he's really busy, he wanted to take time to be a part of this. Eric, I really thank you for all the work that you've done and that you always do, and God should give you strength to continue to do.
Thank you very much, and to all of you who are here, the scholars. One of my favorite jokes, a good friend of mine, Rabbi Fantastic, he told me the joke. He says, Eric, two hunters are in the jungle, and they come up to a lion, and one of the hunters looked at the other and said, let's run, let's get out of here. And the other hunter said, what are you talking about? We can't outrun a lion. And he says, I don't have to outrun the lion, I just have to outrun you. And I laughed when I heard it, but Rabbi Fantastic had this serious look on his face. He said, that's the problem. We're trying to outrun each other. Yes, this person is homeless on the street. Let me just outrun him and get him home. Yes, a 3-year-old child is shot in Times Square. The bullet didn't hit me, I outran the bullet. Yes, a young Jewish child, Joseph, was stomped and maced. And we said, let me just outrun him. What we fail to understand is that even if that lion devours the other person, he's still in the jungle. He's still there. And it's only a matter of time before he's going to catch us. If we don't come together and stop outrunning the lion of bigotry, of hate, of anti-Semitism, of anti-Asian violence, if we don't stop outrunning it and face it and say, I'm going to get rid of that lion, it is only a matter of time before it catches us. That is my fear. When I saw Joseph stomped and kicked, I thought about Jordan, my son. So what happens? We finish stomping the Jewish child, now we go to the African American child? Do we watch the senior 89-year-old Asian woman walk down the block and someone burn her dress? Not my city. Not my city. And so I am saying to you, young scholars and warriors, you may sit in this room and you think to yourselves that this is another academic exercise that we're going through and, you know what, we're just going to go through the motions, but no, it's not. You had a pivotal moment in the history of this country. Who are we going to become? Who are we going to become? Are we going to become the hunter that's trying to outrun everyone? Or are we going to become the symbol and energy of that mural? That was a powerful mural of combining what we have done to human beings across the globe. When I stood in Auschwitz and walked through there, I felt the same thing I felt when I went to Goree Island and watched the door of no return, and millions of men and women were slaughtered coming to these shores and other shores. I felt the same way when I saw what happened in China, with Chinese citizens were demonized during the wars with Japan. Man has been brutal to man, and I say this is the generation when we stop it. That's the moment. That's why I put in place Breaking Bread, Building Bond, 100 dinners over the city, 10 people at each dinner, all coming from different ethnic groups and backgrounds, and doing something revolutionary, talking to each other. That's it. Ask him why you wear kippah, why you wear hijab, why you wear yarmulke, kufi, why do you got Passover, why you got Kwanzaa. That's all we have to do. We fear each other because we don't talk to each other. We live in these silos. We don't engage. Not in Brooklyn, not in New York. Let's lean into the discomfort of learning something new and someone new. This is our moment. This is our moment. If that mural inspires others, you're all of a sudden going to find yourselves in a city without lines, but a city with the greatest race of life, and that's the human race. And that's the part that I want to be lifting up. Thank you very much.
Inspiring, uplifting words, and God give you strength to do His work. Interjected in the middle, but a little fast for Yaakov. Thank you.
Hi. That was a great speech. I want to give you a different perspective. I want to give you a different perspective. I was born in 1946 in the DP camp, the displaced persons camp, in Salzburg, Austria. And many of you are now very well educated about what happened during the Holocaust. And that was a generation of my parents, and as Dorothy explained to you, we didn't know many of them. We never had any grandparents that we could ever see and ever speak to. We didn't have a lot of uncles and aunts that we could be with. But I think that it's also important to know what happened to the second generation, which is Dorothy and I. What effect did this Holocaust have on someone of the second generation? And I want to give you just a few examples. I know the time is a little late, so I'll sort of make my longer speech a shorter speech. My family emigrated in 1949, and one of the things that was so clear to me growing up that there was a cloud in my family. I couldn't put my finger on it, but everything was very secretive. Everything was different than a lot of my friends that were American born. There were secrets, and I had no idea as a young child what the secrets were all about. I learned them subsequently, but at that time I had no real idea. And then when I found out about the Holocaust, I couldn't stop asking questions, but in our family, nobody asked questions. We weren't supposed to ask questions. So I grew up a little differently than those people around me. And one of the interesting things that happened, and I just want to give you a few examples. As a child, I never took a shower. No idea why, but my mother always insisted I take a bath. Always, no matter what the situation was, I always had to take a bath. I couldn't take a shower. It was years later that I learned the what the shower meant to her. And that was something, and I remember when I really realized it, which brings me to my second story actually. I was in summer camp. And I was in summer camp, and I remember the first year in summer camp, I was wondering where they put the bathtubs. And then everybody went and they took showers, and I realized what the whole thing was all about. But one of the interesting things about camp that year was when my parents came to me and said, Yaakov, I was just learning about the Holocaust, I was 12, 13 years old, we're sending you to camp this summer. And I was thinking to myself, what do you mean you're sending me to camp this summer? Yes, we're going to send you to camp. And my first thought was, I'm in a lot of trouble here. I said, this is not the kind of thing I want to really go to. And then they had to explain to me that, look, camp is also something that is a lot of fun. And of course, I easily learned that. The other things that happened to me, I'm just trying to skip around, was that one of the things I learned was that my parents had no guidelines on how to raise children. Just think about it. My mother was 13 when she went to camp. My father was 15 when he went to camp. So, concentration camp. So, where were they going to learn how to raise children? They didn't remember much about what their parents did. So when we grew up, we didn't have that psychological approach, you might say. They didn't understand what a psychological approach was. They treated us in a different way than I think a lot of my American kids were treated by their parents. It was a situation of yes, no. Yes, go out to work. No, you don't really have to go out to work. No. Yes, do this. No. There was always a yes, no. There was always a kind of ambivalence that we grew up with. And in growing up with that, you become ambivalent a little bit yourself. I needed to finish everything on my plate, not because as happens in so that people are dying for food, but because they never had enough food, and they couldn't understand how it could be that I could say I've had enough food. These things became part of my being. You know, there's a study being done, or was done recently, on the genetic aspect of trauma. And the study is very interesting. They did it on Holocaust people, and they found that the children of Holocaust, at least the second generation, I don't know if they got the third yet, the children of the second generation also suffer from the trauma of the Holocaust. I don't know how that could be, but I do know that that's how I feel. And when they did studies of Holocaust children, second generation, they found that these children had exaggerated psychoses, exaggerated things that happened that they felt, and it was such a mess for them sometimes. And it took a long time for me to understand, and also to understand my parents, because I couldn't understand why my mother was so fastidious, always worried about being clean. I always used to laugh. I used to smoke when I was 16, 17 years old, something like that. And I would be at home. My mother was smoking 3-4 packs a day. And thank God she's 96, 97 now. She's doing great. You know, doing great. She's there. And I would smoke, and I would put down the cigarette, you know, on the ashtray. Some of you may remember what an ashtray looks like. So on an ashtray. And then I would pick it up, and before I turned around, my mother would wash that ashtray. So when I put back the cigarette would go out. And that helped me an awful lot to stop smoking, by the way. Because there was always a wet cigarette. That's all I ever had. So these kind of unusual happenings were so common for us. I decided I wanted to become more religious. So I started wearing a kippah. and I wonder where it succeeded. And it wasn't that they were against any sort of religious outlook, but they were afraid of what might happen if someone saw their son with a kippah. And my mother made no bones about it and explained to me, this is not how you have to behave. You have to be careful, and that's the important thing. Both my mother and my father were always careful about their duties. And my father, I think I should bring him in also, Oliver Shalom. My father taught me something that was a very interesting thing. How do you think people survived the Holocaust? I never really understand that. Did God just flip a coin? I mean, you know, the mother has free reign at certain times, and that's how it happened. And one of the things I discovered, at least in my family, and many other families I dare say too, is that people cared about each other. Our Ravens is that people cared about each other. My father and his two brothers went from camp to camp. They were in a lot of very bad camps. Not Auschwitz like my mother, but very bad camps. And they made sure that they fed each other, that they took care of each other. And I realized one of the things that kept people alive was the fact that when they had a piece of bread and they saw somebody didn't have enough, they were willing, even though they were starving, they were willing to share that bread. It was a very true kind of life in that sense. And one of the defining moments in my life, was when I was working for my father. When I was working for my father, we were in the garment sector, in the shopper business. And I was sitting in a very big office with him. His chair was there, the table, and my chair was here. And we had a giant showroom. And in the showroom, I'm sure you can hear me. In the showroom were samples of sweaters, women's sweaters, and t-shirts. It was all over the place. And I was just starting out in the business there with my father. And one day, a fellow with a beard and peyot comes in and looks around. Now, the people who came to buy the sweaters very often came in and they looked around at the sweaters and t-shirts, and then they would lift up their head and say, "Please come." And I was waiting for him to lift up his head from looking at all the sweaters and when all of a sudden he grabbed a handful of sweaters, put it over his arm, and ran out. Well, I ran right after him, and my father ran right after me. But instead of running to the guy, he says to me, "Yaakov, stop." And I said, Dad, we can catch him, we can stop. So I stopped, went back, and I was very upset. And he said, "Listen, Yaakov, you have to understand something. Every 2 months, this fellow comes to our showroom. And I know, he takes a handful of sweaters. They're samples. They don't cost us much." And he told me this really. He said, "They don't cost much. But I got to tell you something. He means it more than I do. He needs those samples. Whether he sells them or he uses them for his children, he needs them. And Yaakov, you have to remember that." And I think that that's a lesson that kept him alive. Because that's what happened in the Holocaust. People who cared about each other. There's a psychological term called the other. If you care about the other, then the other will care about you. And that's a lesson of the Holocaust. That's a positive lesson, if there could be such a thing of the Holocaust. That you and I both have to learn, because that's what's going to change the world. And I'm going to skip all the other stuff I wanted to say just to tell you what I really think. And I think that the lesson for the generation, yours and mine, is really the lesson of the Exodus. Yetziat Mitzrayim. You all know Hebrew. Yetziat Mitzrayim. We talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim that you have to remember every one of the main things you have to say out Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus. But you don't understand. It's not that you have to say out Yetziat Mitzrayim because you want to remember the terrible things that happened. The world has to remember the terrible things that happened to the Jews. The world has to remember that. But we don't have that problem. The reason we have to remember Yetziat Mitzrayim is because there's also Yetziat Auschwitz, and there's a Yetziat Birkenau, and that Yetziat is to remind us that a Kadosh Baruch Hu, that God is watching over us, and as a people, we will always survive. The Exodus was survival with the Jewish people. Auschwitz ended up to be the survival with the Jewish people. And since I live in Israel, I want you to know it's also the survival of Eretz Israel. And in these trying times, I think it's important to remember that it's not that we have to look always at the past as much as we have to be secure that our future will be what I want to want. That's it.
Now we're going to hear from two students. First, our very own Jake Legnano.
Yeah, Jake.
The Holocaust is one of the darkest periods of world history. It is hard for anyone to imagine the murder of 6 million innocent men, women, and children, while the world sat silent. Over the past year, this class has opened my eyes to studying and understanding human behavior. I often wonder if television and social media had existed at the time, would people watch the atrocities from their living rooms? Would they look at their telephone screens that had existed at the time? Would people watch the atrocities? Would they look at their telephone screens to witness the truth being beaten, gassed, and tortured? And if so, would they still remain silent? Albert Einstein once explained, the world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. Silence is a form of evil. What I took away from this class is the concept of communication. When you speak your mind straight from the heart, it gives you the fuel and the passion to better the world. On the other hand, the formation of different groups who are so hostile to one another, as we've seen in the past year, causes tension and division. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, we must learn to live together as brothers or perish as fools. We might not all get along, but we should still respect each other. Different beliefs should not drive this world or country apart. Without borderlines and religious beliefs, we are all the same. Together as one world, one nation, we shall rise together against hate, no matter who you are. Standing up for yourself, your religion, and your race should be a universal goal. Standing up to hate by spreading the truth is crucial. This class has given me understanding how essential it is to speak up and stand up with all kinds of hate. I will do it loudly and proudly. For you, thank you.
Okay, for our final speaker, we're going to have Lenore Mizrahi on her take on
Hi guys, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Lenore Mizrahi. This year, I took the Holocaust and human behavior elective. And while the class was extremely emotional, I understood the importance of the class and how the Holocaust is something I need to have learned. Are there any bad stories of brave survivors who sacrificed everything just to save a life? And aren't the importance of standing up for what you believe in? Yes, there are many people who sat on the side and chose not to help out, there were many people who decided that they were put on this earth to complete a mission. Their lives were soon to be over. Under the rule of Hitler and the Nazis, life wasn't just tough. People were given an extremely small portion of food and were sleeping in very crowded conditions. Human beings, fellow Jews, were degraded to the point that they were classified by numbers, treated like animals. They were not treated like people. It was not being able to do what you want to do. It now seems as if it were not real life. How could it be, I asked myself? Why did they have to be taken from their families? Why were they killed in the gas chambers? Why were kids separated from their mothers? Most importantly, how am I here right now, sleeping in a bed, eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, being with my family, being able to practice Shabbats and holidays? This is crazy to think about. Over this course, I've learned the importance of resistance. Jewish resistance was the act of sticking up or fighting back. Yes, the Nazis were powerful. Yes, we might not survive. But at the end of the day, this was something worth dying for. This was something that they thought was so important that it just couldn't be forgotten. These young, innocent people had their lives taken away from them. They didn't do anything, yet they were tortured and killed. They were starved to death. Many people stood up and fought back. One person that really stood up was a man named Sir Nicholas Winton. Sir Nicholas Winton was a Jewish British banker who successfully saved many children from the Nazis through an operation called the Kinder Transport. There was a scrapbook which consisted of pictures of the kids whom Sir Nicholas saved, and the scrapbook was hidden. One night, Sir Nicholas's wife found the scrapbook, and she invited all the kids who were grown, like they were grown by then, to come to a special event where they honor Sir Nicholas. Sir Nicholas didn't know that he was surrounded by all the children that he saved until the hostess asked everyone who was saved by him to stand up. As Sir Nicholas looked around, he saw the entire room was filled with standing people who were saved all because of him. Tears of joy fell from his eyes. Sir Nicholas is a true role model for me, for everybody, but to me especially. When he did this extremely kind act, he kept it as a secret. He didn't publish it to the world, he did it for himself. Everyone has a mission in life. Sir Nicholas was able to pass away having completed his mission. Sir Nicholas put himself in severe danger knowing what could have happened, but instead he risked his life to save others. The Torah teaches us, La ta'amad adam le'echa. Leviticus, Parak 19. Devarim, Parak 19. Sir Nicholas took this lesson to the extreme and put others before himself. He couldn't bear to see these children in danger. He set an example as what it really means to be truly Jewish. In the poem, we were children just like you. Yafa Eliach writes, we were children just like you, 1.5 million young innocents. She expresses the fact that we are the same, only not by blood. We are children just like you, so what differentiates us? Why take away our innocent lives? Thank you.
The last part of the program is that we're invited to head outside and view the mural. And what we'd like to do is actually, we'd like to close programs here with Hashikah. We'd like to sing Hashikah outside by the mural. Thank you so much.
It's 340. No.
Thank you, guys. Probably about walking in here and walking out. Where's the mural, Sandy? That way? Oh, is that permanent installation. So do we walk on the outside or on the inside?
Outside. Outside? Yeah.
Is this a permanent?
You can put the music on. You're gonna sing it. He has it?
Yeah.
Did you not think?
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
Sorry.
Yeah, you got it.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for making it beautiful.
Thank you.